Chapter 1. The Key That Screams When You Touch It. Hey, it's late. Come closer, pull the blanket up to your chin, and let me tell you about the night the Vatican finally decided to open a door it had nailed shut for 700 years. Dr. Elna Moreau landed at Fiumicino on a gray November afternoon in 2024. The kind of afternoon that feels like the sky itself is holding its breath. 32 years old, pale from too many winters in the Bionica Library at Yale. Dark auburn hair twisted into a knot that had already begun to unravel. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had spent the last decade learning how to read the thoughts of dead men from the pressure of their quills. The invitation had arrived 6 weeks earlier on heavy cream paper that carried no watermark, only the faint embossed impression of 2 crossed keys beneath the papal tiara. No return address. The text was handwritten in a spidery Latin that made her stomach fold in on itself the first time she read it. Ad archivum secretum, Vaticanum pro documents nondum revelatus venias sola, de 7 Novembris, Anno Domini 2024, non loqueris. Come alone. Do not speak. She had laughed nervously, the way academics do when they're being hunted by something they pretend is only curiosity. Then she booked the flight. At the arrivals gate, a man in a plain black suit waited with a sign that read only M. No words were exchanged. He took her passport, her phone, her smartwatch, and placed them in a felt-lined box that closed with the soft finality of a coffin lid. A black Mercedes carried her through Rome at twilight, past the Colosseum glowing like a broken tooth, past the Tiber sliding along like liquid obsidian. They entered Vatican City through a gate she could not find on any map. Inside the walls, the city felt refrigerated. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees the moment the car crossed the boundary line. The driver killed the engine beside an anonymous side door in the Cortile della Pina. 2 Swiss guards in plain clothes opened it without looking at her face. Then the blindfold, thick black silk that smelled faintly of myrrh and candle smoke. She counted steps, 147, down a spiral staircase so narrow her shoulders brushed both walls. The stone was damp, breathing, at the bottom. 3 steel doors opened and closed with hydraulic sighs. The final barrier was a lead-lined vault door the color of dried blood. A combination lock clicked like vertebrae when it swung inward. The air that rolled out was so cold, her teeth ached instantly. 4 degrees Celsius, maybe less. Her breath crystallized in silver feathers that hung in the air before drifting to the floor like ash. They removed the blindfold. She was standing in a room that should not exist. No windows, no electric light, only 6 tall beeswax candles guttering in iron sconces, throwing shadows that moved when no one else did. The ceiling was lost in darkness. The floor was ancient mosaic, tesserae the color of bone. In the center, on a plinth of black marble veined with gold, sat a small object wrapped in what looked like parchment, human skin. She knew it immediately. The pores were still visible, tiny dark mouths frozen mid-breath. The sheet had been scraped thin enough to be translucent, then folded around something heavy and angular across the surface, in faded iron gall ink. Someone had written over and over in a cramped medieval hand, non aperias, non aperias, non aperias, do not open, the escort. An old Monsignor, whose face was a map of collapsed piety, spoke for the first time. His voice sounded like paper tearing. You have been granted 1 hour. Do not remove the object from the plinth. Do not speak its name. When the candles burn blue, you must leave. He backed out. The vault door sealed with a sound like a tombstone sliding into place. Elena was alone with the thing. She circled the plinth slowly. The candles hissed. The parchment wrapping was warm, warmer than the air, warmer than her own skin. Beneath it, she could feel the shape, an iron key, large, medieval, the kind that once locked cathedral doors or prison cells for heretics. The skin around it flexed, almost imperceptibly, the way a throat moves when someone swallows in their sleep. She should have waited, should have taken photographs, notes, measurements. Instead, she reached out and touched it. The scream came from inside her skull. It was a child, maybe 8 years old, voice raw from screaming for days. It lasted less than a second, but it left a taste of iron and terror on the back of her tongue. Her knees buckled when she caught herself on the edge of the plinth. The parchment had unrolled of its own accord. The key lay naked on the black marble. It was beautiful in the way a murder weapon is beautiful. Long bow shaped like a papal crozier. Shaft pitted with rust that looked wet. Teeth filed into tiny screaming faces. A single drop of something dark trembled at the tip, refusing to fall. She wrapped it again, hands shaking, and backed away. The candles were already burning lower, the flames a sickly cobalt. Time was almost up. The vault door opened as if it had never been closed. The Monsignor took the felt box from her trembling fingers, placed the key inside, and sealed it without meeting her eyes. You will stay tonight in the Domus Sanctae Marthae, he said. Tomorrow we begin the transcription. They returned her phone. The screen showed 3:11 a.m. Local time, though she had been underground for barely 40 minutes. Back in her room, a narrow monastic cell overlooking St. Peter's Square. She tried to sleep. The mattress smelled of starch and old incense. She lay rigid beneath the wool blanket, replaying the child's scream on a loop behind her eyes. At 3:33 a.m., exactly, she woke with her mouth full of iron. The key was there, wedged sideways between her molars like a crown that had grown overnight. Cold, impossibly heavy, tasting of rust and altar wine. When she tried to scream, the teeth cut her tongue, blood filled her mouth, thick and warm. She stumbled to the mirror, in the dim glow of the emergency light. She saw it, the bow of the key protruding between her lips like a grotesque bit. Her reflection smiled, though she did not. Somewhere far below, beneath layers of stone and centuries of silence, something had begun to turn in its lock. She reached for the key with shaking fingers. The metal burned cold, and from the depths of the Vatican, carried up through pipes and ancient ducts. She heard it again. The child, clearer now, no longer screaming. It was laughing. If your mouth feels strange right now, don't check the mirror yet. Close your eyes. I'll stay with you until the next chapter, but whatever you do, don't say your real name out loud tonight. It's listening. On Chapter 2, The Corridor That Breathes. The next morning tasted like rust. Elena woke with the key still lodged in her mouth. She had to pry her own jaw open with both thumbs until the hinges cracked. The iron slid out slick with saliva and blood, clattering onto the tiled floor of the bathroom like a dropped cutlery. Her tongue was split in a perfect Y when she spat. The basin filled with dark crimson that refused to swirl down the drain. It simply sat there, watching her. She wrapped the key in a linen handkerchief embroidered with the papal coat of arms, stolen from the bedside table, and shoved it to the bottom of her satchel and went to find breakfast. The refectory was empty, except for one young priest who looked as though he had not slept since seminary. Father Luca Rossi was 29, Roman born, hands that trembled even when holding a coffee cup. His eyes were the washed out blue of old frescoes left too long in candle smoke. When Elena introduced herself, he flinched as if she had struck him. "You're the American," he whispered. "They told me you would come. They told me I have to go with you." "Who told you?" He glanced at the crucifix on the wall as though expecting it to answer. "The ones who don't speak out loud." At 21's, the same Monsignor from the night before appeared at her door. No words, only a nod toward the corridor. Elena followed. Luca trailed 3 paces behind, clutching a violet stole and a small leather case that rattled with holy oils and salt. They descended the same spiral staircase, but this time the blindfold stayed off. The temperature had fallen further. Frost feathered the walls like fern patterns. Their breath came in white plumes that lingered too long, forming faces before dissolving. At the lead-lined vault door, the Monsignor stopped. "Beyond this point, recording devices fail. Voices are discouraged. If you turn back now, no one will blame you." Elena looked at Luca. His lips were moving in silent prayer, but his eyes were fixed on her satchel, on the faint bulge where the key lay. She pushed the door open herself. The candles from the previous night had burned down to stubs of blue wax pooled like frozen blood. The plinth was empty. In its place, someone had drawn a perfect circle of salt. Inside the circle lay a single black feather the length of a man's forearm. Luca crossed himself so violently his shoulder popped. They moved the 17th century bookcases aside, mahogany shelves groaning like old men, until a rusted iron grate appeared set flush into the stone. It was the width of a coffin lid and twice as tall. A padlock shaped like a screaming mouth held it closed. Elena did not remember bringing the key out, but the key was suddenly in her hand, warm as living flesh. The teeth slid home with a wet click. The grate swung inward on hinges that had never been oiled. A breath rolled out, slow, humid, tasting of crypt and menstruation. The corridor beyond spiraled downward in a perfect Archimedean curve, lit by nothing, yet they could see. The walls were black tufa, volcanic stone once used to build Rome's sewers and catacombs. Here it wept. Thin rivulets of dark fluid seeped from pores in the rock, gathering in slow tears that ran downward and vanished into cracks. The smell was unmistakable, iron and frankincense, the exact scent of consecrated blood left too long in a chalice. Luca produced a small LED torch. The beam died the instant it crossed the threshold. He tried a beeswax candle instead. The flame bent sideways, pointing deeper in, as though the corridor itself were inhaling. They stepped inside, the grate sealed behind them with the finality of a jaw snapping shut. The air had weight here, like walking underwater. Every breath coated the tongue with the taste of old coins. Their footsteps, soft soles on stone, echoed ahead of them, returning a half second too late and slightly out of rhythm, as though someone were walking just out of sight, mimicking them, 20 meters in. The weeping intensified. The fluid was no longer running down, it was rising, climbing the walls in thin capillaries, forming delicate red lacework that pulsed in time with Elena's heartbeat. She reached out. The stone was warm. Beneath the surface, something moved, slow, peristaltic. Luca whispered the beginning of the rite of exorcism. His voice cracked on the first Amen. The corridor answered with a low, wet chuckle that came from everywhere and nowhere. They kept descending. The spiral tightened. The walls closed until their shoulders scraped. The red fluid now dripped from the ceiling in slow, deliberate drops. One landed on the back of Elena's neck and slid under her collar like a tongue. It burned cold. Luca stopped. On his white clerical collar, a child's handprint had appeared. Perfect. 5 tiny fingers, palm glistening. The print was wet. As they watched, the fingers flexed, slowly, lovingly. They curled inward, tightening around his throat. The fabric began to darken as blood soaked through from beneath. Luca clawed at his neck, but touched only cloth. The handprint squeezed harder. Veins bulged in his eyes. A thin line of blood trickled from his left ear. Elena grabbed his wrist. "Look at me. Breathe through your nose." He tried. The handprint loosened a fraction, but did not vanish. Ahead. The corridor exhaled again, long, shuddering. The temperature rose 5 degrees in a heartbeat. The red fluid on the walls thickened, became viscous, began to drip upward, defying gravity, forming stalactites of blood that hung like wet rubies, somewhere deeper, very faint. A child began to sing, not words, just a single sustained note, high and pure, the kind of note that makes dogs hear and men feel in their teeth. The note climbed, held, then fractured into a sob that was not quite human. Luca's knees buckled. The handprint was now embedded in his skin. The outline glowed faintly, as though lit from within by candlelight. He looked at Elena with sudden, terrible clarity. "It knows we're here," he said. His voice sounded like 2 voices, his own and something much older. It's been waiting for someone who could carry the key in her mouth. Elena felt the handkerchief in her satchel shift. The key inside was growing warmer, hotter, until the fabric began to smoke. She tore the satchel open. The linen had burned away in the shape of the key itself. The iron was glowing dull red. The screaming faces on the teeth writhing in silent agony. The child's note rose again, closer now, accompanied by the soft pad 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 of bare feet on wet stone. Luca dropped to all fours, retching when he lifted his head. The handprint had become a full child's hand, pale, waterlogged, protruding from his collarbone as though growing out of him. The fingers flexed, beckoning. "Come." The hand whispered in a voice that tasted more than heard. "The choir is missing one voice." Elena backed against the wall. The stone pressed into her spine like a living thing, soft and pulsing. Somewhere below, the singing multiplied, 2 voices, then 4, then a dozen. All children, all perfectly in tune, all coming up the spiral to meet them. Luca looked at her one last time. Blood ran from both ears now, tracing perfect lines down his neck and soaking into the white collar until it was scarlet. Run, he croaked, but the corridor had already decided otherwise. The walls inhaled. The red fluid surged upward in a single sheet, forming a curtain that sealed the way back. In the sudden darkness, the child's hand tightened again around Luca's throat, lifting him gently to his feet like a puppet. His eyes rolled white. Elena ran downward, deeper, the key burning a hole through the bottom of her satchel and branding itself into her hip. Behind her, she heard Luca's footsteps following, pad, 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 perfectly in time with the unseen child's. Though she knew he was no longer walking on his own, the corridor breathed once more, slow and satisfied, and somewhere ahead, the choir waited with open mouths. If your throat feels dry right now, does it? That's only the air remembering your name. I'll wait here with you. But whatever you do, don't turn around. He's closer than you think. Chapter 3: The 9 Seals of Living Wax. The spiral ended without warning. One moment, Elena was stumbling downward, lungs burning with the taste of pennies and myrrh. The next, her foot struck flat stone, and she pitched forward into a chamber so vast the candlelight from Luca's stolen beeswax taper could not find the far wall. The air here was warmer, thick as amniotic fluid, and it clung to the skin like a second membrane. The floor was paved with hexagonal basalt tiles, each one carved with a different papal tiara. In the center, suspended from the vaulted ceiling on 9 silver chains, no thicker than rosary links, hung the seals. They swayed gently, though there was no breeze. 9 perfect circles of black wax, each the diameter of a dinner plate, each glistening with a wet sheen that made them look freshly poured. But they were old, older than the Counter-Reformation, older than the Schism. The wax had been mixed with human fat, rendered slow over consecrated fires. You could still see the faint marbling of yellow beneath the black, like fat in a cut of spoiled meat, at the heart of every seal, encased like an insect in amber, beat a child's heart. They pulsed in staggered rhythm, thump, 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 never quite together, as though arguing over whose turn it was to live. Tiny valves fluttered visibly beneath the translucent wax. The arteries and veins that should have been severed long ago had instead grown into the wax itself, threading outward in delicate scarlet filigree that twitched when the hearts contracted. On the surface of each seal, etched backward so that only a mirror could read them correctly, were the names of the capital sins: Arognes, Aidvia, Ixul, Aidni, Igol, Aritna, Idavargs. The letters had been pressed in with a hot branding iron while the wax was still soft. The ridges were raised and blistered, weeping clear fluid that smelled of melted church candles and gangrene. Elena's knees gave out. She caught herself on the nearest tile. It was warm, almost feverish, and beneath her palm she felt a faint, answering throb, as though the floor itself had a second, slower heartbeat behind her. Luca's footsteps had stopped. She turned. He stood framed in the mouth of the corridor, collar soaked crimson, the child's hand still protruding from his collarbone like a grotesque brooch. His eyes were fixed on the seals with the glazed reverence of a man staring into the sun. Blood dripped from his chin in a steady rhythm that matched the hearts above. Superbia, he whispered, voice layered with something that was not his own. The first to fall. The chain holding the highest seal, the one marked Aeronis, shivered. A hairline fracture appeared across its surface, zigzagging like lightning frozen mid-flash. From inside came a wet popping sound, as though a joint had been pulled from its socket. The crack widened. A bead of black wax oozed out, thick as tar, carrying with it the smell of scorched hair and altar wine gone to vinegar. Then the memory hit Elena like a fist to the solar plexus. She was 8 years old again, kneeling in the sacristy of St. Ignatius in Providence, Rhode Island. The air was thick with candle smoke and the priest's cologne, something cheap and cloying that tried to hide the sour stink of his sweat. Father McCarrick's hands, those pale, doughy hands with the liver spots, were on her shoulders, pressing her down, down, while his thumb traced the line of her collarbone as though measuring for a noose. The memory was not just visual, it was total. She felt the rough wool of his cassock against her cheek. She tasted the copper tang of fear in her mouth. She smelled the melted wax from the vigil candles he kept relighting even though Mass was over. And worst of all, she felt the exact moment his breathing changed, the wet hitch in his throat when his fingers slipped beneath the neckline of her first communion dress. The walls of the chamber became the sacristy walls, peeling floral wallpaper and all. The projection was perfect, three-dimensional, wet. She could see the dust motes floating in the shaft of light from the high window. She could hear the muffled sound of her mother's voice in the nave, calling her name. Elena screamed. The sound came out as a child's scream, high and broken. The first seal shattered completely. Shards of black wax rained down like obsidian hail, each piece still pulsing. From the ruined center, the child's heart tore free with a sound like wet fabric ripping. It was smaller than it had looked encased, barely the size of a sparrow, slick with wax and blood, trailing a web of arteries that had elongated into jointed, spider-like legs. It landed on the floor with a soft plop. Then it began to crawl toward her. The legs, veins hardened into chitin, clicked against the basalt tiles. Each step left a print of blood that sizzled where it touched the stone. The heart itself was still beating, faster now, frantic, as though terrified of what it had become. Elena scrambled backward. Her spine struck one of the hanging chains. The second seal, Divya, swung forward, brushing her cheek with its greasy underside. The contact burned like dry ice. Another memory tried to force its way in, this one of her 16th birthday. The priest who wasn't a priest at all, the back room of the youth group retreat. But she bit down on her tongue until she tasted blood, and the memory recoiled. The crawling heart reached her boot. It paused, valves fluttering, then began to climb. She felt every leg hook into the leather, every tiny suction cup pulse of the aorta as it pulled itself upward. When it reached her knee, it nestled there like a grotesque pet, beating against her thigh in perfect synchrony with her own racing heart. Luca took one step into the chamber. The child's hand on his collarbone flexed, fingers lengthening, knuckles cracking as new joints formed. His cassock split along the seams as something inside him began to swell. 7 more, he rasped. But the voice was not his. It was Father McCarrick's voice, aged 24 years and soaked in hell, 7 more sins to confess. Little Elena? The remaining seals began to sway in earnest now, chains singing a high metallic whine. Droplets of wax fell upward, defying gravity, splattering against the ceiling where they stuck and began to spread like mold. The crawling heart on Elena's leg convulsed once, twice, then burrowed. She felt it first as pressure, then as a tearing, wet heat. The skin of her thigh parted without pain, as though anesthetized by memory itself. The heart wriggled inside, arteries threading into her femoral artery like roots seeking soil. She watched in numb horror as a bulge traveled upward beneath her jeans, pulsing, settling finally just below her hip bone. It beat there now, a second heart, her heart. The chamber lights, if they could be called lights, dimmed to a bruised purple from the shadows between the seals. Shapes began to detach, silhouettes of children, naked, skin translucent, veins glowing like embers. Their mouths were sewn shut with black thread that dripped wax. One by one they turned their heads toward her. Their eyes were the seals themselves, miniature black circles branded into the sockets. Luca collapsed to his knees. The child's hand on his collarbone had grown an arm, then a shoulder. A second head was pushing out of his throat, small, eyeless, crowned with a ring of wax candles that burned with black flame. Elena tried to stand. The new heart in her thigh gave a powerful, possessive thump that locked her muscles. She could feel it feeding, drawing something out of her that was not blood. The second seal cracked. This time, the memory was worse. If you feel something moving beneath your skin right now, don't press on it. It's only just getting comfortable. I'll stay with you, but the choir is warming up, and they still need their ninth voice. Close your eyes. We're going deeper. Chapter 4. The Children Who Sing with Their Lungs. Outside the chamber of the 9 seals did not end. It simply gave up pretending to have walls. Elena staggered forward, and the basalt tiles became flagstones worn hollow by centuries of bare, penitential feet. The ceiling lifted into rib vaulting so high it disappeared into blackness. She had crossed an invisible threshold into a chapel that had been bricked up during the Avignon papacy and never unbricked again. The air here was different, warmer, wetter, tasting of frankincense that had fermented into something sweet and spoiled. 33 beeswax candles floated in midair without holders, arranged in a perfect circle above the nave. Their flames burned downward, dripping wax upward into the darkness where it vanished. In the choir stalls sat the children, 33 boys, none older than 12, dressed in the white albs and red cassocks of the Schola Cantorum of 1353. Their skin had dried to the color of old parchment, stretched drum-tight over delicate bones. Their mouths had been sewn open with thick gold thread, liturgical thread blessed by a pope who later burned for simony, so that each small jaw gaped in a perfect, silent O. The stitches glinted like tiny halos, but it was the chests that stole the breath from Elena's lungs. Every rib cage had been cracked outward in a deliberate, surgical bloom. The sternums were split and folded back like the petals of black tulips, hinged on cartilage that had never been allowed to heal. From each open cavity, the lungs had been drawn out and draped over the shoulders like scarlet stoles. They hung there, glistening, still pink, still moist, inflating and deflating in perfect unison with a sound like wet bellows. And they sang, a single, endless Gregorian line in the Phrygian mode, dies irae, dies illa reversed, and slowed to the speed of dying. The notes came not from throats, but from the lungs themselves, air forced through bronchi that should have rotted 670 years ago. The melody was flawless, yet every tone vibrated at a frequency that scraped the cochlea raw. Elena felt blood begin to trickle from her left ear without realizing it had started. The boy closest to her, third row, left side, cheeks still round with baby fat, turned his head. The motion was smooth, boneless. Vertebrae clicked like rosary beads as the neck rotated a full 180 degrees. The face that now stared at her was upside down, gold stitches stretching wider in what might have been a smile. His eyes were sewn shut with entire rosaries, black wooden beads threaded through the lids and knotted at the bridge of the nose. From beneath the beads seeped a slow, steady trickle of blood that ran down the forehead, over the inverted nose, and dripped from the hairline into the open mouth below. The lungs on his shoulders swelled larger, scarlet sacs filling until the veins stood out like road maps. The boy inhaled, though he had no diaphragm left to inhale with, and the chapel answered. Every candle flame bent toward him. Luca stumbled in behind Elena, half carried by the thing growing from his throat. The second child head protruding from his collarbone had now fully formed. A boy of perhaps 9, skin waxen, eyes milky. It opened its mouth and joined the chant in perfect fifths. Elena's own second heart, the one that had burrowed into her thigh, gave a jealous thump. As though offended by the harmony, she took one involuntary step down the center aisle. The flagstones beneath her soles were warm and soft, like walking on tongues. On the high altar, black marble veined with gold, lay the instruments of a possession ritual that had been interrupted mid-performance. A silver aspergillum, still filled with holy water, turned to vinegar. A thurible overturned. Coals long cold, but still glowing faintly with sullen red eyes. And in the center, an open book bound in human faces. The skin of the faces, still blinking slowly, the Missal Niger. The 1348 edition, the Black Mass of Pope Clement VI's bastard son. Pages fluttered, though no wind stirred the air. Latin text crawled across the vellum like ants. Per pulmones extractos, et corda puerilia, invocamus te, Domine inferi ut accipias, hospitem novum. Through lungs drawn forth and the hearts of children we call thee, Lord of the depths, to accept a new guest. The choir's volume rose, the lungs inflated until they touched one another, forming a canopy of living tissue above the stalls. From the raw edges of the rib cages oozed a clear serum that smelled of myrrh and baby teeth. Elena tried to back away, but the second heart in her leg convulsed, rooting her to the spot. She felt it tug, as though trying to drag her bodily toward the altar. Luca, what was left of him, dropped to his knees. The child head on his shoulder opened its mouth wider than anatomy allowed. From inside came a voice that was many voices, the combined choir of every child ever silenced in a sacristy. Exorcizo te, immundissim spiritus, Luca began, but the words turned to blood halfway through. The possessing child laughed with his tongue. One of the mummified boys stood. The movement was wrong, joints bending backward, knees reversing with soft pops. He stepped down from the stall, lungs flapping like wings. The gold thread in his mouth stretched, but did not break. Instead, it began to unravel, stitch by stitch, pulled by an invisible hand. As each stitch came free, a drop of black fluid welled up and fell upward, joining the canopy of lungs above. He walked toward Elena with the stately gait of a bride. When he reached her, he placed both hands, small, cold, smelling of candle smoke, on her cheeks. His thumbs pressed gently against her closed eyelids. "Open," he whispered, and the voice was every priest who had ever told her to open wider. She felt the gold thread from his own mouth begin to thread itself through her lips, seeking purchase behind her. Luca screamed, or the thing wearing Luca began the ritual in earnest. In nomine papae clementi sexti, qui peccavit in carne, et in ossibus puerorum, ego te invito. Domine Tartari. The candles flared black. The lungs overhead contracted all at once, forcing a single, colossal exhalation that smelled of confessionals and semen. The sound that came out was not Latin, not any human language, a chord that contained every suppressed sob ever uttered behind a confessional grate. Elena's second heart burst free of her thigh with a wet pop, trailing arteries like party streamers. It scuttled up her torso and nestled against her sternum, beating in perfect counterpoint to the choir. The boy with the bleeding rosary eyes leaned in until his sewn lips touched her ear. 33 voices, he said, but the harmony is incomplete. We saved a place for you. His lungs unfurled, enveloping her head like a hood of living silk. She felt them press against her face, warm, wet, breathing for her. Inside the darkness of the lung hood, she heard the ritual reach its climax. Accipe corpus hoc, et sanguinem meum, et nomen tuum novum. Accept this body, this blood, and your new name. The gold threads finished its work. Elena felt her mouth sewn open from the inside, stitches looping through gums and palate with the neatness of embroidery. She tried to scream. The sound that emerged was the missing note. The choir swelled into perfect, unbearable consonants. The floating candles guttered out one by one, plunging the chapel into absolute black. In that darkness, 33 pairs of lungs inhaled as one, and Elena, for the first time in her life, felt completely full. If your chest feels tight right now, that only means the lungs are measuring you for size. Breathe slowly. There are still 29 seats left. I'll hold your hand, but the next note is yours. Or in Chapter 5, the obsidian chalice that drinks your name. The chapel did not end. It simply forgot it had ever been a chapel. Elena walked, if walking is the word when your feet no longer quite touch the ground, through a membrane of lung tissue that peeled away from her face with a wet kiss. The 33 choir boys remained behind, seated once more, lungs draped like scarlet bibs, singing their endless reversed dies irae in a key that now lived inside her bones. She was alone again. Luca's body had been carried off by the children, dragged backward into the stalls by the ankles, his cassock leaving a wet red stripe on the flagstones. The last she heard of him was a sound like tearing silk as the second head finally pushed all the way out. A head. The darkness thickened into something almost solid. It had texture, velvet soaked in old blood. When she breathed it in, her lungs filled with the taste of communion wine left open for centuries. The labyrinth had decided to show her its heart. The passage narrowed until her shoulders scraped both walls. The stone here was no longer stone, it was obsidian. Volcanic glass formed when Rome was still a village of shepherds. It drank the faint light of the single candle she still carried and gave nothing back. Her reflection slid along the walls, fractured, multiplied, each version of Elena a little more broken than the last. At the center, the corridor simply stopped. A circular chamber, 9 meters across, floor a single slab of polished basalt. In the middle, on a pedestal of fused human finger bones, stood the chalice. It was carved from a single piece of obsidian, so pure it seemed to generate darkness rather than reflect light. The bowl was wide enough to drown a child's head. The stem was twisted like a spine. At the base, etched in letters that hurt to perceive, ran a single line in Paleo-Latin, Nomen tum est sanguis meus. Your name is my blood. Inside the bowl floated a viscous black liquid, thick as melted tar, perfectly still, no surface tension, no ripple. It did not reflect the ceiling. It reflected endings. Elena stepped closer and saw her death. She was older, hair gone iron gray, lying on a metal table beneath surgical lamps. Her chest was open in a perfect Y incision. A gloved hand reached in and lifted out her heart, still beating, still wrapped in the spider veins of the seal heart from chapter 3. The heart was placed gently into the same chalice. The liquid rose to greet it like a lover. She blinked and the vision was gone, but the after image burned behind her eyes. The air in the chamber had weight and temperature, exactly 36.6 degrees, blood heat. Every inhalation tasted of her own mouth. She should have turned back. There was no back behind her. The corridor had sealed. Obsidian had flowed across the entrance like cooling lava. Seamless, she was expected. The chalice waited. Elena circled it slowly. The liquid inside never moved, yet she felt watched. Around the rim, tiny notches had been carved, 33 of them, each one crusted with a different residue: wax, ash, dried milk, semen, tears. One notch still glistened wet. A voice, not heard but tasted, like communion wine on an empty stomach, spoke inside her skull. Nomina nuda tenemus. We hold the naked names. She understood. This was the final registry. Every soul that had ever been silenced in the church's long night had spoken its true name here, and the chalice had drunk it. The liquid was not oil or blood. It was distilled identity, black and absolute. Elena's tongue began to itch. She pressed her lips together, but the itch became a burn, then a splitting. The seam in the center of her tongue, the one that had never quite healed from the key in chapter 1, reopened with a soft pop. Blood welled, thick and sweet. Do not speak. The rational part of her screamed, do not give it your name, but the chalice was patient. It had centuries. She backed away until the obsidian wall met her shoulders. The glass was warm, almost feverish. Beneath the surface, faces pressed outward, children, cardinals, popes, mouths opening and closing in silent pleas. One of the faces was Luca's. His eyes were black glass. His lips moved. Help me. The word formed in her mind with his voice, desperate, human. Elena's resolve cracked. Luca, she whispered, Luca Maria Rossi. The name left her tongue like a living thing. The moment the baptismal name crossed her lips, three things happened at once. One, her tongue split cleanly down the middle, from tip to root, parting like a wishbone. There was no pain, only a sudden cold emptiness where wholeness had been. Blood poured upward in a perfect crimson ribbon, defying gravity, arcing through the air and pouring into the chalice with a sound like rain on a coffin lid. Two, somewhere in the distance, though distance no longer existed, Lucas screamed. It was a sound of flaying, of every vein in his body being pulled inside out through his pores. 3. The liquid in the chalice rose half an inch, greedily drinking. Elena clapped both hands over her mouth, but it was too late. The name was given. The contract sealed. The walls of the chamber rippled. From the sealed corridor came the wet, dragging sound of something approaching fast. Luca's body, what was left of it, was hurled into the room as though thrown by an invisible giant. He landed face down, limbs at impossible angles. He was changing. His cassock had burst open down the back. Beneath the skin, black Latin text was crawling, words from the Missal Niger, writ in living ink. The letters moved like tadpoles under the surface, rearranging themselves into new verses. Veins rose to meet them, darkening to ink, then to tar. His fingernails lifted from the nail beds with soft, peeling sounds, curling backward in perfect spirals like wood shavings. Underneath, the new nails were obsidian, sharp as chalice shards. He rolled over. His eyes were gone, only smooth black glass now, reflecting the chalice. His tongue, forked like Elena's, protruded between teeth that had lengthened into needles. Elena, he said, and the voice was a choir of 33 children speaking through one ruined throat. You named me, now I must name you back. He rose in a single, fluid motion, joints bending the wrong way, from his open chest cavity. The child head that had been growing earlier, now pushed fully free, connected only by a thick rope of spinal cord. It smiled with Luca's mouth. The chalice sang was a low, resonant note that vibrated in the marrow. Luca as no longer. Luca advanced. Each footstep left a print of black liquid that hissed where it touched the basalt. Elena backed around the pedestal. Her split's tongue throbbed in time with the second heart in her chest. Blood still dripped upward from the wound, feeding the chalice in slow, deliberate pulses. There was nowhere to go. The thing wearing Luca reached her. Its hands, fingers now elongated, joints multiplied, cupped her face with terrible tenderness. Say it again, it whispered. Say my name so I can finish drinking yours. Elena tried to speak, but her tongue was two useless flaps. Blood filled her mouth, overflowed, ran upward in twin streams that joined the ribbon already feeding the chalice. The level inside the bowl rose higher. Luca's body convulsed. The black text under his skin burst outward in raised welts, forming a perfect circle of scripture around his sternum. The child head leaned forward and began to lick the blood from Elena's chin with a tongue that was far too long. The chalice was almost full. One more name, one more drop, and the ritual would be complete. Elena felt her own name, the true name, the one given at baptism. the one no one but God and the devil should ever know, rising in her throat like vomit. She clamped her teeth on the forked tongue until bone met bone. Blood exploded across her face. The thing wearing Luca screamed with 33 voices. In that moment of distraction, Elena did the only thing left. She seized the chalice with both hands. The obsidian burned colder than absolute zero. Her skin fused to the glass instantly, nerves flash freezing, flesh crystallizing. She lifted it, though it weighed more than the world, and turned it upside down over her own head. The black liquid poured. It did not fall. It sought. It flowed into her eyes, her split mouth, her ears, her nostrils. It tasted of every confession ever forced from a child's lips. It filled her until she felt her body become the chalice, her veins the stem, her heart the bowl. The last thing she saw before the darkness completed her was Luca's body collapsing, empty, a husk with no name left to hold it together. Then the chalice spoke inside her, with her own voice, now perfect and terrible. Elena Maria Moreau, it said, tasting every syllable like wine. Welcome home. The chamber went silent. The chalice was empty, and somewhere in the dark, 33 lungs began to inflate again, waiting for the next verse. If your reflection just blinked 1 second too late, don't worry. It's only learning your new name. I'll hold the silence with you, but the choir is almost ready. And the cup is never full for long. Chapter 6, Cardinal Giacomo Venturi, who refused to rot. The chalice did not break when it fell. It simply ceased to be a cup and became a womb. Elena knelt in the sudden, absolute silence, black liquid still dripping from her hair in slow, deliberate beads that struck the basalt and did not splash. They soaked in, as though the floor itself were thirsty. Her tongue, now two separate, twitching ribbons, tasted only of her own name, repeated endlessly in the dark behind her eyes. She was no longer entirely inside her body. Part of her floated above, watching the woman on the floor with the detached pity one feels for a stranger drowning. The rest of her was deeper, curled around the thing that had just drunk her identity and was now digesting it with slow, peristaltic satisfaction. Then the footsteps began, not the soft pad of bare child feet. These were heavy, deliberate, the sound of a corpse that had forgotten how to lie down. Each impact sent a tremor through the obsidian walls. Dust, ancient bone dust, sifted from the ceiling like gray snow. The temperature plummeted. Elena's breath came out in silver plumes that froze midair and shattered into tiny knives of ice that rained onto her shoulders. He stepped through the wall as though it were only a veil. Cardinal Giacomo Venturi, executed by garrote and fire in the Campo dei Fiori on the 17th of February, the 1798, stood 9 feet tall in the center of the chamber. He had not decayed. He had been prevented from decaying. His skin had been flayed in one continuous sheet from crown to sole, then restitched onto the muscle with gold liturgical thread, the same thread used for papal vestments. The stitches were perfect, tiny, glittering crosses every half centimeter, where the gold entered and exited the flesh. The wounds still wept a clear serum that smelled of myrrh and gangrene held in perfect suspension. The skin itself was pale, almost translucent, stretched so tight over the elongated bones that every tendon stood out like ship's rigging. His cardinal's robes hung in tatters, scarlet silk reduced to ribbons that fluttered though there was no wind. The galero had fused to his scalp. The tassels were now living veins that pulsed slowly. But it was the face that broke what was left of Elena's mind. The lower jaw had been removed entirely, sawn off at the joints, and replaced with a hinged iron grate, the kind once used to cover reliquary windows. Behind the grate writhed a nest of tongues, dozens of them, pale and bloated, each one belonging to a different pope who had signed Venturi's death warrant. They moved ceaselessly, licking the bars, tasting the air. When they spoke, the voices overlapped in a horrible papal chorus. Giacomo, Traditor, Hereticus, Missaniger. His eyes were intact, beautiful, liquid brown, utterly human, and brimming with centuries of exquisite grief. He looked at Elena and smiled with the lipless mouth above the grate. The expression was tender, almost paternal. Little Judas' daughter, the tongues chorused in perfect Latin, the accent shifting with every syllable, innocent Asaith, then pious Theistus, then Clement the Theorist. At last, Elena tried to crawl backward. Her shadow, cast by no visible light, stretched across the floor like spilled ink. Venturi raised one hand. The fingers were too long, joints multiplied, each nail a shard of stained glass window. From his palm unspooled a single strand of gold thread, the needle already threaded through the tip of his index finger like a stinger. He knelt, slowly, joints cracking like chapel doors, long unopened, and began to sew her shadow to the floor. The needle entered the darkness at her feet first. There was no pain in her body, but Elena felt it in her soul, a cold, precise tug, as though someone were stitching her childhood nightmares directly into the stone. With each stitch, the shadow darkened, thickened, became something more substantial than mere absence of light. She remembered. She remembered the ledger he now held in his other hand, a folio bound in soft, pale leather that could only be cured human foreskins. The pages were vellum, but the ink was menstrual blood mixed with lampblack. It was the genealogical record kept by the Custodes Silenti since the 1314, every descendant of Judas Iscariot tracked through the centuries. Marked for service or for sacrifice, her name was there, written in a hand that trembled with excitement. Elena Maria Moreau, Filia Judithae Carson, ex semine Iscariotis, nata, 8th Aprilis 1992, parata, prepared. Venturi turned the page toward her. The gold thread paused mid-stitch. You were promised to us the day you were baptized, the tongues whispered, now in the voice of her own grandmother, dead these 20 years. Your mother tried to hide you. She changed the parish records. She moved 3 times, but blood remembers. The needle plunged again. This time it caught the shadow of her throat. Elena felt her voice sewn shut from the outside in. No sound emerged, only a soft internal scream that echoed inside the chalice that was now her ribcage. Venturi leaned closer. His breath smelled of consecrated hosts left to molder in a tomb. I was custodian for 233 years, he said, and the grief in his human eyes deepened until tears, clear, perfect tears, rolled down the flayed cheeks and hissed where they touched the gold stitches. They burned me alive for celebrating the Mass backward. They said I invited the devil, but the devil was already here, child. He wears mitres and rings and smiles from thrones. The thread looped around the shadow of her heart. The second heart, the seal heart, gave a sympathetic lurch, as though recognizing its new master. I refused to rot, Venturi continued, voice dropping to a lover's whisper. I refused to let the silence end. Someone must keep the names. Someone must drink them when the cup overflows. Someone must bear the weight of every secret the church ever buried. He finished the final stitch at the crown of her shadow's head. The gold thread knotted itself, then sank into the floor like a root. Elena's body went rigid. She could not move. The shadow was now anchored, a black pool of living tar that pulsed with her heartbeat. Venturi stood, towering. The tongues in the grate licked their lips in anticipation. It is almost time, they chorused. The choir is ready. The lungs are warm. The cup is clean. He reached down and lifted her effortlessly, one hand beneath each armpit, thumbs pressing into the hollows where her collarbones met. Her feet dangled inches above the floor, but the shadow remained sewn fast, stretching her between light and dark like taffy. Up close, she could see the detail of his flaying. The gold stitches formed tiny crosses, each one a perfect crux quadrata, where the thread entered the flesh. Tiny droplets of liquefied myrrh beaded eternally. Look at me, he commanded gently. She had no choice. The human eyes locked onto hers. I was not evil, child. I was tired. I heard too many confessions. I carried too many names. When the French came in 1798, they offered me freedom if I would reveal the archives. I chose the fire instead, and the fire chose me back. A single tear, his, fell onto her cheek. It burned like holy water on a demon. You will be better than I was, he whispered. You already carry Judas's remorse. That is the strongest chain of all. He lowered her until her feet touched the floor again. The sewn shadow held her upright, a marionette of darkness, from the iron grate in his face, one tongue longer than the rest, forked. The tongue of Pope Alexander VI extended and gently licked the blood from her split lips. Elena Maria Moreau. It tasted savoring. The 34th custodian, the one who was born with the key in her mouth. Venturi stepped back. The gold thread connecting them shimmered, then began to reel her in, slow, inexorable. Her shadow dragged her body forward 1 inch at a time, toward the place where he stood behind him. The obsidian walls began to bleed again. But this time, the blood formed letters, her name, over and over, in every language ever used in a confessional. She felt the weight of 2,000 years settle on her shoulders, every child ever silenced, every secret ever buried, every name ever drunk. Venturi opened his arms. The flayed skin parted along the stitches, revealing not bone, but a cavity filled with living parchment, thousands of pages fluttering like moth wings, each one inscribed with a stolen name. There was a space in the center, exactly her size. Welcome home, little sister. The tongues sang in perfect, heartbreaking harmony. The silence is warmer when it is shared. Elena took the final step. The gold thread pulled taut, and the custodian of silence, old and new, embraced across the centuries. If your shadow just moved without you, don't look down. It's only learning its new stitches. I'll stay here in the light with you, but the thread is already through the needle, and the choir is waiting for its final voice. Breathe once more while you still can. The next breath belongs to the archives. Chapter 7. The night the entire archive becomes a throat. The embrace lasted one heartbeat, or perhaps it lasted forever. Time had already surrendered when Cardinal Venturi released her. Elena felt the gold thread snap free of her shadow with a sound like a rosary breaking in a child's fist. The stitches dissolved into her skin, leaving 33 tiny golden scars that glowed faintly beneath the surface, permanent stigmata of ownership. She was free to move again. But the chamber was no longer a chamber. The obsidian walls had begun to breathe. It started as a subtle undulation, the way a throat ripples before swallowing. Then the black glass softened, liquefied, turned the color of raw meat. Veins rose beneath the surface, thick purple ropes that pulsed with the rhythm of something ancient and hungry. The temperature climbed in a single sickening rush from freezing to blood warm. 36. 60 degrees Celsius exactly, the temperature of a living body in the first throes of fever. Elena's skin prickled with instant sweat. The air thickened until every breath felt like inhaling soup. From the walls came the sound of tearing paper, thousands upon thousands of archived documents, papal bulls, trial records, suppressed gospels, the secret diaries of saints, burst outward in wet explosions. They were no longer parchment. They were lung tissue, pale and veined, flapping desperately on stalks of trachea. Each sheet bore writing in blood that still dripped. They beat the air like drowning birds, trying to scream with mouths that had never been granted. The floor buckled. The basalt slab in the center split along a perfect vertical seam, revealing a throat. It was the original foundation stone of Old St. Peter's Basilica, laid in AD 319 directly over the grave of the apostle himself. But the stone had become flesh, a vertical, glistening esophagus descending into absolute darkness. The walls of the throat were ringed with circular muscles that contracted in slow, deliberate peristalsis. From the depths rose a wind that smelled of myrrh, decay, and the copper tang of every martyrdom ever committed in the name of love. The choir arrived. They came marching from every corridor that had ever existed beneath the Vatican, 33 mummified boys, lungs now swollen to the size of mainsails, scarlet and veined like cathedral windows. Their footsteps made no sound. Their sewn mouths had been ripped open wider. Gold thread hung in bloody ribbons. They formed a perfect circle around the throat mouth, lungs inflating until the rib cages split further with soft cracking sounds. Then they inhaled. The suction was immediate and monstrous. Elena's hair whipped forward. The lung paper documents were sucked into the choir's mouths, vanishing down throats that had no stomachs. The temperature rose another degree. The air became humid, tasting of amniotic fluid and incense. Luca, what the chalice had left of him, was dragged into the circle. He no longer walked. He was pulled by invisible threads of gold, body elongated, limbs jointed wrong. His skin had split along the black Latin text. The letters now crawled off him like leeches, reforming in the air into floating scripture. His eyes were empty sockets filled with writhing tongues. He reached Elena and seized her ankles with hands that had too many fingers. Time to feed the fisherman, the tongues in his mouth chorused, every pope who ever damned a soul, speaking at once. Peter's tomb is hungry for its 33rd piece of silver. He began to lower her feet, first into the throat. The flesh of the esophagus parted wetly, revealing rings of cartilage that glistened like halos. The heat inside was unbearable. Steam rose in coils. Elena felt the first touch of the throat wall against her soles, soft, muscular, eager. It contracted experimentally, tasting her. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed before it left her mouth. Above her, Cardinal Venturi stood unmoving, flayed arms spread wide. His human eyes wept tears that fell upward, sucked into the choir's lungs. "Choose," he said, and his voice was gentle, heartbroken. "Shatter the chalice and release us all. Every soul I have kept silent for 7 centuries, every pope who damned me, every child whose name I drank. Or take my place, become the lock, keep the silence, spare the world what crawls beneath." In her right hand, suddenly, impossibly, was the obsidian chalice. It had never left her. It had become part of her rib cage, fused to bone. She could feel its weight inside her chest, black liquid sloshing against her heart. Luca's grip tightened. Her calves slid into the throat. The muscles closed around them like a second skin, warm and loving and final. She felt the peristalsis begin, slow, inevitable, drawing her downward inch by inch. The choir inhaled again. The suction became a roar. Venturi knelt, bringing his ruined face level with hers. "I was not strong enough to bear it alone," he whispered, and for the first time the grief in his eyes cracked open into something raw and human. "I screamed for 200 years. No one heard. Please, little sister, don't leave me alone again." A single tear, his, hers, impossible to tell, rolled down her cheek and fell into the throat. It was swallowed with a soft, grateful gulp. Elena looked at the chalice fused to her chest. She could feel every soul inside it, pressing against her ribs. Thousands of children, hundreds of popes, the weight of centuries. They were begging, some to be freed, some to be kept hidden forever. Luca shoved harder. Her knees vanished into the throat. The flesh closed over them with a wet kiss. She had seconds, with the last of her strength. Elena raised both fists and brought them down against her own sternum. The chalice shattered. There was no sound at first, only a perfect, crystalline silence. Then the world tore open. Black liquid exploded outward in a perfect sphere, carrying with it every soul the chalice had ever drunk. They poured out like smoke, like ink in water, children first, translucent and luminous, mouths open in silent thanksgiving. Then the popes, mitres askew, faces contorted in terror and relief. Finally, Venturi himself, flayed skin peeling away in golden sheets, revealing beneath not bone but light, pure, agonizing light. The throat screamed. The choir boys' lungs burst like overfilled wineskins, spraying blood and paper across the walls. The throat mouth convulsed, trying to close, but the souls were too many. They poured upward, through the ceiling, through the basilica above, through the sky itself. Luca's body was caught in the flood. The possessing tongues were ripped from his sockets and flung howling into the light. For one heartbeat, his real eyes returned, blue, human, terrified, and met Elena's. "Thank you," he mouthed. Then he was gone, carried away with the rest. The throat collapsed inward, flesh turning to stone once more. The temperature plummeted. The lung paper documents fell like dead leaves. Elena remained kneeling in the center, chest cracked open in a perfect black circle where the chalice had been. From the wound poured not blood, but silence. Thick, absolute, healing silence. Venturi's final tear fell onto her forehead. Where it touched, a single gold stitch appeared, then faded. "Forgive me," his voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere. "Forgive us all." The light vanished. The chamber was empty. Only Elena remained, chest sealed, breathing slow, steady, alone, above her, far above, in the basilica that tourists would visit tomorrow. A single candle guttered out for no reason, and somewhere, a child who had never been allowed to scream finally did. If the silence in your room just got heavier, that's only the archive closing its throat. You're safe now. The souls are free, but the lock is broken, and something else is learning how to breathe. I'll stay until dawn. Sleep if you can. The next chapter is the last, and it's already inside you. Chapter 8. The Passenger Who Never Boarded. Elena woke to the gentle chime of a seatbelt sign and the low, reassuring hum of jet engines at cruise altitude. She was reclined in 2A, first class, Delta Flight DL114 Rome GFK. The cabin was bathed in that artificial twilight airlines use for long-haul red-eyes. A cashmere blanket lay neatly across her lap. Her mouth tasted of recycled air and the faint metallic residue of sleep. For one blessed, dizzy moment, she felt nothing at all except the ordinary ache of a transatlantic flight. Then she looked at her hands. No scars, no gold stitches glowing beneath the skin. Her tongue was whole, single, ordinary. She probed it against her teeth. No split, no blood. The key was gone. The chalice-shaped hollow in her chest was gone. Even the second heartbeat had fallen silent. A psychotic break, she told herself. The words arriving fully formed and comforting. Extreme stress, sleep deprivation, perhaps a microdose of scopolamine in the Vatican's incense. The brain is capable of extraordinary hallucinations when pushed. She exhaled so long and shaky, and reached for the call button to ask for water. The button didn't work. She pressed again. Nothing. The entire panel was dark. First class was empty. Every seat, 2B through 8J, was vacant. Blankets folded, headphones coiled, screens off. The privacy doors stood open like unanswered questions. No flight attendants in the galley, no clink of glassware, only the soft whoosh of conditioned air and the sense that the plane was flying itself. Elena unbuckled and stood. Her legs were steady. She walked the aisle. Business class, empty. Coach, empty. The entire aircraft carried only one living passenger. She told herself it was a dream, a continuation of the hallucination. Any second now, a smiling crew member would appear with warm towels and apologies for the strange lighting. No one came. Back in 2A, she opened the window shade. Outside was not darkness dotted with wing lights, but a uniform, depthless gray, like looking into television static made of fog. No stars, no horizon, no sense of motion at all. Her satchel was under the seat in front of her, exactly where she had stowed it in Fiumicino. She pulled out her MacBook with the reverence of a woman touching a relic, that might bite. The lid was already open. The screen glowed with a new document, cursor blinking patiently, title centered. In her own handwriting, Acta Custodes Novi Anno Domini M. Excamitscus Initium, Acts of the New Custodian, Year of Our Lord, 2024, beginning below the title. Text was appearing, line by line. Without her fingers on the keyboard, she is reading these words now. She believes she is on Delta Flight DL114. She is wrong. The letters formed in real time, perfect replicas of her handwriting. The little loop on the G's, the crossed T that always leaned left. The cursor advanced. New lines bloomed. She will try to close the lid. She will fail. The battery icon reads 100% and will never decrease. Elena slammed the MacBook shut, or tried to. The screen resisted, then reopened itself with a soft, hydraulic sigh. The way the lead-lined vault door had in another life, more text. She is afraid, but the fear is familiar now. It tastes like communion wine and rust. She is almost home. She stood again, heart hammering. The cabin lights dimmed further, shifting from warm amber to the bruised purple of a healing bruise. The seatbelt sign illuminated overhead, not the usual icon, but the Vatican coat of arms. Crossed keys beneath the triple tiara, rendered in blood-red pixels. A child's voice came over the intercom, sweet, sexless, the same Phrygian note from the Chapel of Lungs. Ladies and gentlemen, or lady, we are beginning our descent. The plane banked gently. Though there was nothing outside to descend through, the voice continued, singing now, the reversed Dies Irae, flawless Gregorian chant, 33 voices braided into one. Dies Irae, Dies Illa, solvet saeclum in favilla. Elena ran. She sprinted the length of the aircraft, past rows of empty seats that seemed to watch her with upholstered eyes. The emergency exit signs glowed, but the handles were smooth metal, no levers. The cockpit door was sealed, window opaque black glass. She pounded on it anyway. Let me out. The intercom laughed, a child's delighted giggle that echoed inside her skull. You never boarded. Custos, you were carried. She slid down the door until she sat on the carpet, knees to chest. The MacBook was in her lap again, though she had not carried it. The document had grown. She is sitting outside the cockpit. She is crying. She does not yet understand that tears are just another form of ink. Elena wiped her face. Her fingers came away wet, but the wetness was black and smelled faintly of myrrh. The plane leveled. The engines spooled down to silence, yet they were still descending. She felt it in her inner ear, a slow, inevitable drop. The cabin lights went out entirely. In the darkness, the child's voice returned, intimate, right beside her ear. Look under your seat. She didn't want to. Her body bent anyway, beneath 2A, exactly where the life vest should have been. Lay the iron key. It was warm, pulsing. The screaming faces on the teeth were smiling now. The MacBook screen flared to life again, illuminating her tear-streaked face in cold white. Final lines, appearing one after another. She has found the key. She will use it soon. The door remembers her name. Somewhere far below, or above, direction had lost meaning. A vast throat cleared itself with a sound like stone grinding on stone. The intercom delivered its last announcement, soft, almost loving. Thank you for flying Archivum Airways. Local time at destination, always. Temperature, blood warm. We hope you enjoyed your flight. And Custos, welcome back. The key turned in Elena's hand, though there was no lock. The lights came up just enough to show that every seat was now occupied. 33 choir boys in blood soaked albs sat smiling at her, lungs draped like scarves, gold thread glinting in their open mouths. In the seat beside her, Cardinal Venturi inclined his flayed head in gentle greeting, and in the window, for one heartbeat only, Elena saw not fog, but the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, upside down, receding. Then the screen went black. The MacBook closed itself with a soft, final click. Somewhere in the cargo hold, a single suitcase began to rattle, as though something inside had just learned how to knock. Next week, the Paris catacombs have started mailing teeth to living addresses, and every envelope is addressed in handwriting that matches your own. Good night. The flight is over, but the archives never close. Sleep, if you still can. I'll be here when you wake, or when something else does.